We are recording.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our March meeting of the State Bar's Council on Access and Fairness. Before we get started, I will ask Shannon to read some of our housekeeping reminders.
One moment. Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Council on Access and Fairness meeting. Thank you for joining us. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raise hand feature. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference. Per Bagley-Keene requirements, all cameras must be kept on for the duration of the meeting. If you are unable to have your camera on, you must indicate a reason for your non-appearance during the meeting. Please be aware of your surroundings behind you. All committee members will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then select enable auto transcription. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, Elizabeth, will you please take roll?
Yes. Yemi Ademo-Mary, absent. Kamal Chokshi,
Present.
Tara Davis, absent. Cecilia De Leon,
Here.
Jezreel Hill,
Present.
Tristan Higgins, absent. Angelica Salceda,
Here.
Yusuf Zakir, absent. Shalak Guinness,
Present.
Judge Michael Rhodes.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move into the public comment portion of our meeting. We did receive, and the public comments were distributed to members of the council, those that were submitted ahead of time. At this point, if there are any members of the public who are present who wish to comment about any item on our agenda, we'll give you 3 minutes. Please raise your hand. Shannon, are there any folks with their hands raised?
Yes, there is. I will allow them to speak. Your microphone has been enabled.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and the rest of the committee. My name is Jason Amesqua, and I serve as the Dean of Lincoln Law School of San Jose. We are we're previously an unaccredited registered institution and recently received our accreditation from the Committee of Bar Examiners. We are very proud of having done that, but in the time that I've been Dean, approximately 1.5 years, I've been trying to be more involved with the State Bar. I serve as a member of the CS Bars Committee, and I've also been interested in the dialogue that's been happening at the Board of Trustees meetings, the Committee of Bar Examiners meetings, as well as the Council on Access and Fairness as well. And just wanted to point out that at the last the full formal Board of Trustees meetings, there was a lot of things said about our types of schools. Several trustees used the word predatory to describe our schools after seeing some of the data that was presented by the State Bar staff. While I can't argue the numbers, I can point out that it is a subset of numbers. I also believe that there's more to the story for each of our individual institutions, our histories, our missions, and most importantly, our students and their stories of resilience and pursuing their legal education. So what I'd like to do today is just, if there are, Trustee Good in that board meeting, in that Board of Trustees meeting, articulated COAF's feeling on these schools as outraged. And so if there is outrage on this committee, I would love to be part of a conversation to help understand where that comes from beyond the numbers and try to do a little bit more to contribute to the dialogue. Trustee Buenaventura is also a former faculty member at Lincoln. as well. And we're really proud to have such prestigious members as him that have served on our faculty. And the story is same for a lot of our institutions. So I'm speaking for myself to jump into any dialogue or subcommittee that is reviewing the unaccredited rules or the potential for what to do with our types of schools. And I think I've shown myself to be fairly competent in how to make sure that we are having solid outcomes, being compliant with the state bar rules, and doing the best for our students. So I appreciate the time and the ability to make this comment. And I will follow up with a public comment in writing to give you some information. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anybody else with their hands raised, Shannon?
No, there is no one else with their hands raised.
All right. Thank you all members of the public that are here, and thank you for your comments. We'll move on to the chair's report. I just have a short report, and what I want to talk about briefly is I had the opportunity on Tuesday of this week to be up in Sacramento and to watch from the Senate chamber of the state capitol the Chief Justice's State of the Judiciary address. And naturally, my mind was on our meeting today, and some of the things that she said really reminded me of the work that we've done and that we have been doing. So this year, in the context of some larger comments, she talked about the role of the judiciary and the courts in making sure that the public can freely access all courts, that we safeguard individual rights, and we promote the fair and timely administration of justice. And she said that no one is outside of the law, which to me really speaks to access. It speaks to fairness at all levels of our legal system. And in her first State of the Judiciary back in 2023, she also talked about building an inclusive court system and named access and fairness at the top of her list in terms of the priorities of the branch. And I know that the work that we've done as a council and that we're going to continue to do is really aimed at those same goals, equal access to the law and to the legal profession, and supporting law students and aspiring lawyers, as well as lawyers and members of the judiciary to continue that pursuit of access and fairness. There may have been some bumps along the road, and there will continue to be some bumps along the road as we do that. But I know that we're going to keep pushing forward on some of this important work. And we talked a little bit last time about the funding for some of our legal aid programs, and it really has been exciting for me to see those get rolled out and implemented. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that our work is going to continue so that we can support really the folks that are in the profession now and the folks that are coming into the profession and addressing some of the challenges that they face at every step of the way. So I want to thank you all for your continued work and interest in this important work as we move forward. Those are my comments, I should say, my oral report. And I want to also acknowledge and thank the members of the Board of Trustees who are here with us. Sarah, Raymond, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to hearing from you at any point. Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you for our director's report.
Thank you. So I just have a few updates for the group. I know that there has been some questions about the state bar's work in this space. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that the state bar has a statutory mandate in Business and Professions Code 6001.03 to enhance access, fairness, and diversity in the legal profession and the elimination of bias in the practice of law. So the state bar remains committed to this work as part of its public protection mission. And we want, though, to stress that we are sensitive to how this changing policy landscape impacts our stakeholders. And you'll hear later today in some of our updates how we are pivoting and adapting to address some of those sensitivities with our programming. And then speaking of this statute, I want to report that we do submit a report to the legislature every other year about our work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that report will be submitted by its due date, which is March 30th, so sometime next week. And I wanted to thank Judge Michael and Shalak for their help in reviewing the report in advance. The next item I wanted to provide an update on is the sub-entity review process. The Board of Trustees Executive Committee, well, let me back up for a moment. So every 5 years, the board reviews all non-statutory sub-entities. And so currently, the board is reviewing those sub-entities, including COAF. Many of you, I believe, should have received a survey about this late last year. And so the Board of Trustees Executive Committee discussed the sub-entity review recommendations, staff recommendations at their February meeting. And the board will discuss and make their decision, I believe, in May. I can report that the executive committee appeared supportive of the staff's recommendation related to COAF. And so I don't think there's anything that we need to be concerned about in that area. That being said, since the board hasn't yet completed their review process, they also have not approved COAF's 2025 work plan, but we can continue our work as we have been in anticipation of the sub-entity review process being completed in May. And then the last item I wanted to flag for everybody is that applications for appointments to state bar sub-entities are now available and being accepted. For COAF, there will be up to 3 vacancies for the 2025-2026 term. And so I hope that you'll be able to share that announcement widely. We have a bit of a compressed timeline for outreach this year. So I hope that we usually have a lot of applicants and we haven't yet seen that. So hopefully you all can share with your networks. I sent an email about this a few weeks ago, but I can always resend it after the meeting. So that's my report. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Elizabeth? I don't see any questions, but I'll just echo her encouragement. Please, please, please tell folks to send in their applications. I'm happy to talk with anyone who has questions about the work. I know that Elizabeth is as well. I'll volunteer you, Elizabeth, to answer questions about the scope of the work, the time commitment, and things like that. So thank you, Elizabeth. At this point, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Are there any comments or questions for the minutes from our December 6, 2024 meeting? I don't see any questions or comments. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll have Kamal as our motion and a second from.
I don't know if that was me, Angelica, or someone else weighed in.
We'll go with Angelica. Thank you. I think we had multiples. Thank you both. All right, we have a second, Elizabeth.
Dave O'Mary. Absent. Choksi.
Aye.
Oh, no, I'm present. Sorry, this is Yemi. I'm present.
Oh, sorry.
I'm having some computer problems. So I'm on my phone. I'm having some internet problems, but I'm present.
And okay. And your vote for this item?
I approve the minutes. Yes.
Okay, great. Davis, absent. De Leon,
Aye.
Hill,
Approved.
Higgins, absent. Salceda,
Aye.
Zakir, absent. Guinness,
Approve.
Rhodes,
Aye.
that's 7 yeses, 0 no's, 3 absent. The motion carries.
Thank you. Yemi, thanks for joining us. It looks like we're calling in from the same place. So good luck with your connection issues. If the next, okay, so our next item, and I do see Raul Duran is with us, will be our training on the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, as well as Prop 209. Raul?
Hello, yes. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay. So yeah, my name is Raul Duran. I'm an assistant general counsel in the Office of General Counsel, presenting on 2 topics today that are relevant to the work of COAF. The first being Prop 209 and its restrictions on diversity activities, and it followed directly thereafter by a presentation on the Bagley-Keene Act. So just to start, this presentation on Prop 209 is focused on California state law, and it's not intended to address federal law or any recent developments in the area of affirmative action on the federal level. So Proposition 209 limits the California government's agencies' abilities to consider race and other categories in hiring, contracting, and education. It was enacted by California voters in 1996, and it limits agencies' ability to pursue affirmative action type policies. In relevant part, it states, the state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, or public contracting. So Proposition 209 is only implicated when the state government is acting in these areas, and it doesn't apply when working in the private sector. For our purpose, that means it may be implicated in COAF activities to the extent we're addressing issues of race, sex, ethnicity, etc. However, they've often come up in the context of public employment. It also comes up for us in decisions of who and how we decide to contract with third parties. So for purposes of Proposition 209, to discriminate means to make distinctions in treatment, show partiality in favor of, or prejudice against a particular candidate or group of candidates. Preferential treatment means giving preference, which is giving a priority or advantage to one person or group of persons over the others. Discrimination on the characteristics, as I've stated before, race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin are prohibited. The California Supreme Court has recognized what the voters' intent was and when they enacted Proposition 209, and that was to expressly prohibit reverse discrimination. So Proposition 209 applies to both differential treatment of members of a majority group as well as members of underrepresented groups. This is a bit different from federal law, like equal protection, where there may be a balancing test and where preferential treatment may be justified by compelling government interest. Under Proposition 209, preferential treatment and race-based discrimination are absolutely prohibited. So courts in California have recognized the difference between impermissible diversity activities that advantage one group over another versus permissible activities that aim to broaden access to all. So in the important high voltage case, the Supreme Court struck down rules requiring city contractors to either meet a quota for use of minority and women-owned subcontractors, or to provide such contractors with special notice and procedural rights in the bidding process. However, it also recognized that outreach designed to broaden recruitment for public employment is permissible. So I'll get into this a bit more later. But this is setting out what is permissible versus what's not. Also in this Connerly case, the Court of Appeal provided that affirmative action programs imposing specific goals and timelines for hiring women or members of minority groups is impermissible, as well as a special notice. So notice that only is given to certain categories of individuals is prohibited. But again, outreach efforts designed to broaden the pool of applicants is permissible. And so another category of conduct that is permissible under Proposition 209 is conducting research and analysis regarding the employment of underrepresented groups. So the idea here being that it's sort of studies to assess the sort of current landscape of minority groups is within conduct that's considered permissible under Proposition 209. Data that may be necessary to identify and eliminate the vestiges of segregation and discrimination, to ascertain whether there's been prior discrimination, to identify hiring criteria to ensure they're job related and do not arbitrarily exclude members of an underutilized group. And then need to identify inclusive outreach efforts to ensure that members of underutilized groups have equal opportunity are all permitted. There was a case called American Civil Rights versus Berkeley Unified School District, where a court held that race-neutral policies are permissible so long as they are not used as a proxy for race. So this is a pretty fact-intensive inquiry, and something that, to the extent we have questions about whether or not this is implicated, it's something that we would likely run by our Office of General Counsel. But essentially, there was this case where the court allowed decisions on for a school for students to be taken into account the diverse characteristics of specific neighborhoods, because it wasn't considering the individual characteristics of students. However, the court in that case said it was permissible, but if it was really a proxy for race, then it could be struck down as a violation of Prop 209. So just to briefly go through again what kind of activities are permissible versus not permissible under Prop 209. It's impermissible to make any hiring policy or decision based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. That includes quotas and goal setting. It doesn't apply just to policy, but individual decision making, such as consideration of candidates for a position. And you also can't provide special notice. So you can provide information relevant to hiring or recruiting only to members of a certain categories of individuals, if not also made available to all potential candidates. You also can't reopen positions or otherwise adjust hiring procedures for the purpose of obtaining more candidates from an enumerated category. And you cannot provide incentives to managers to hire individuals from any enumerated category. But what is permissible is outreach to increase an applicant pool. So that includes posting job opportunities within minority bar associations and other minority groups, providing the information is shared broadly, and participating in diversity and minority job fairs, provided such fairs do not exclude participants on the basis of enumerated characteristics, provided the State Bar also participates in job fairs aimed at the broader population. Targeted outreach to underrepresented schools and geographic areas that are underrepresented in the applicant pool is permissible, as well as advertising and distributing the State Bar's mission and its diversity policy activities, including the work of COAF. And then in terms of hiring, it's also permissible to use diverse hiring and interview panels. It is also permissible in eliminating barriers to hiring to include job criteria that may disproportionately impact underrepresented groups while having no or limited relevance to job performance. So this is sort of identifying criteria that may be disproportionately impacting an underrepresented group. If it's not relevant to the job performance, you can eliminate such criteria. You can also create hiring guidelines and interview questions that value diverse skills and experiences, so long as those criteria are relevant to the position. That may include foreign language ability, demonstrated commitment to valuing diversity, experience working in diverse workplaces or serving diverse populations, and demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity. In the last set of examples here that I'll talk about that are permissible are activities and programs that reduce unconscious bias and in-group favoritism, including training, such as implicit bias training. Monitoring analysis of female and minority involvement and success in recruiting and hiring. This sort of goes back to the collecting of data that's considered permissible. And then consistent with Title VII, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, ensuring a discrimination-free workplace in order to promote retention of diverse staff. All right, so that's big picture Prop 209. Are there any questions? All right.
Any questions? I can't see any hands, virtual or otherwise. Okay, thank you, Ro.
All right, so we'll jump right into Bagley-Keene. As I mentioned before, it's also really important for COAF in the way that it conducts its meetings. So the State Bar of California is expressly subject to the Bagley-Keene Act and all of its meetings, although it doesn't apply to certain subcommittees like Jenny, and it doesn't apply to the State Bar Court, but it does apply to COAF, and I'll get into a bit later on about why. So the purpose of the act, big picture, I think it's important to keep in mind the goals when you think about the restrictions that exist in the statute. But the big picture is that the work of the public is meant to be done in public, and also to provide the public an opportunity to participate, and that is to be heard, and that's generally done through allowing the opportunity for members of the public to provide public comment. Because of the sort of public interest in understanding the work and being able to participate in the work of public agencies, courts and the California Attorney General have generally construed the provisions of Bagley-Keene in favor of greater public access. So the Bagley-Keene Act applies to certain bodies, and it does not apply, for example, to sort of the internal workings of the State Bar, but certain decisions have, the legislature or the State Bar have determined are important enough that they require the sort of the doing of work in public interest, such that they're subject to Bagley-Keene. And those are the work that get assigned to, like, for example, the board or one of our other committees. And so Bagley-Keene applies to every state board, commission, or multi-member bodies created by statute, executive order. It also applies to boards, commissions, committees, or multi-member bodies that exercise authority delegated by a state body. So if COAF were to create a subset and delegate authority, that body would also be subject to Bagley-Keene. Advisory bodies, advisory committees and subcommittees, or similar multi-member bodies of 3 or more persons created by formal action of a state body or a member thereof are subject to Bagley-Keene. COAF is considered an advisory body of the State Bar, which is why it's subject to Bagley-Keene. And then official representative of state bodies serving on other boards or commissions that are supported in whole or part by funds provided by the state body. So as I've kind of hinted at, subcommittees are also covered by Bagley-Keene if they meet one of 2 criteria, either if they exercise authority delegated by the board or other state body, or if it's formally created and consists of 3 or more persons. When COAF or any other committee creates a working group, this is why we'll have just 2 or members on the working group, because if you have only 2, you're not subject to Bagley-Keene. So informally created subcommittees are also not subject to Bagley-Keene if they do not consist of a majority of members and do not exercise authority on behalf of another state body. So it can be unclear at times, I think, what is formal creation of a committee, but it should be interpreted broadly. And unless the commission or committee is created by staff or an individual board member independent of the body's authorization or desires, it should be viewed as formally created. If the chair of a state body acting in their official capacity creates a committee or commission, it will likely be considered formally created. But there are sort of two categories we think are not formally created, and those if they're created solely by staff or committees formed by volunteers outside of a formal meeting. So Bagley-Keene applies to meeting. So you might ask, what is a meeting? Bagley-Keene defines a meeting as any congregation of a majority of the members of a body at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon an item within the jurisdiction of the body. So all three of those elements are important. It's for a majority, meaning to hear, discuss, and deliberate, and within a topic that's within the jurisdiction of the body. It's important to know what is a meeting because there are notice requirements that attach to all meetings of a state body. Generally, we have to provide 10 days notice of the meeting with an agenda. The notice must state the date, time, and location of the meeting. It must include contact persons for questions. Generally, only items on an agenda can be discussed unless there is a late addition, although late additions to an agenda require a special justification, and there's procedures for that. The meetings must be ADA compliant, must provide an opportunity for public comment, and although there's exceptions to these requirements in the event of a special emergency meeting. Just say generally, staff at the State Bar will be responsible for complying with the notice requirements of a meeting. Discussion is only meant to be on topics that are actually noticed on the agenda. However, the body can make a determination if there's any reason for sort of like an urgent need to discuss an item. But 2/3 of the body needs to make the finding that there exists immediate need to take action, and it came to the attention of the body subsequent to the posting of the agenda. I think I'm not sure how often this has been done in the past. I imagine for COAF it's likely fairly rare, but there is sort of basically a procedure available for late additions to agendas. Materials distributed at meeting are also available to the public unless there is an exemption. We borrow basically the standard from the California Public Records Act to if a record needs to be withheld on public interest balancing grounds or in the context of it revealing the deliberative process of the State Bar. But generally anything prepared and presented at a meeting will be available to the public through a public records request if needed. So this is important, and one of our important takeaways from this training, that a meeting doesn't have to occur in one place. Obviously, we're all on Zoom, but it can also happen through email or through a series of communications. So a series of communications through intermediaries to discuss, deliberate, or take action on an item of business within the subject matter of the state body might still be considered a meeting. So this includes phone calls, emails, serial briefing. So generally, the advice we provide is you shouldn't be interacting with other members of COAF on topics within the jurisdiction of COAF outside of a meeting. It can be the case that a meeting through a series of phone calls or emails between members could be considered a meeting under Bagley-Keene and could violate Bagley-Keene because it won't have complied with our notice requirements. Generally, the guidance we give is if you have questions, you can communicate directly with a member of staff, and staff can send messages directly to COAF members, but they should not be relaying to other members of COAF other things they've heard from other COAF members to avoid the sort of creation of a meeting unintentionally. You should also know that generally records of COAF may be publicly disclosable to the public So it's subject to the California Public Records Act. This includes emails and text messages. It also may include emails on your personal devices. So to the extent you're mindful about what you're sending when you're doing the work of COAF, you should keep in mind that it might be subject to a public records request. And there's even case law showing that the member's browsing history during a public meeting may be disclosable to the Public Records Act. So please keep that in mind. The Bagley-Keene also provides certain clear exceptions to the meeting definition. So individual contact between members of the body that don't otherwise violate the act. Generally, that means like contact that's not on a subject that's within the jurisdiction of the committee. Attendance of a majority of the members at a conference, training, or workshop. The caveat there is that should also be outside the jurisdiction of the committee. Open and publicized meetings regarding a topic of state concern organized by an outside group. Purely social or ceremonial occasions. Again, as long as a business of the body is not discussed at the event. And the majority of members of the body can attend an open notice meeting of a standing committee, so it's like of another body, as long as they don't participate. It won't be considered a meeting for Bagley-Keene purposes. So this is kind of what I was getting at before. You want to avoid this like serial meetings in this like hub and spoke idea of what might constitute a meeting under Bagley-Keene. So again, you would want to avoid replying all to messages sent to all members of COAF, because that could be construed as a serial meeting. And again, it could be done through email, phone calls, text messages. But the prohibition on serial meetings does not prohibit staff from engaging in separate conversations or communications outside of meetings to answer questions or provide information. So this Stockton newspaper free redevelopment agency case is just to illustrate the hub and spoke idea of a serial meeting. An attorney individually polled members of a body for their approval of a real estate transaction, and the court in that case concluded that a series of individual telephone calls between the agency attorney and the members of the body constituted a meeting. So this goes back to the idea that the Bagley-Keene is meant to promote that the work of a body is done in public, and because a serial meeting is not a noticed meeting, it runs against the purpose of the act. Under Bagley-Keene, we're allowed to do teleconference meetings over Zoom, but there are specific requirements that apply to a remote meeting. In 2024, the legislature enacted SB 544 to allow us to continue to do remote meetings, but there are certain criteria that depend on whether or not a body is advisory or not. COAF, because it's advisory, has sort of less stringent requirements for conducting its meetings remotely. So to do a remote meeting, the COAF is advisory, it can do it this way, is that all members can participate remotely without noticing their location or making the remote location available to the public, but the names of all members participating remotely must be on the agenda at least 24 hours before the meeting. Members must be visible on camera unless technologically impracticable. I noticed, and I don't think I'd heard it before at the beginning of our meeting, Shannon briefly reiterated the importance of this. It's expressly stated in the Bagley-Keene Act. If you cannot be visible on camera, it's all right, but you must at some point state the reason for why you are not able to be visible on camera. So we must also have at least one physical location where the public can participate in the meeting, and a member of staff must be present. The teleconference information must be posted, and if these requirements cannot be met, then all members must post their physical location. So for voting, there's a prohibition about doing secret ballot. Goes again toward the idea that meetings should be done in public. There's no secret voting. So this is what I hinted at before, that there are sort of exceptions to some of the notice requirements. And so there is an exception for having a meeting in under the 10 days required in special circumstances. I think this is rare and unlikely to come up for COAF, but just so you're aware, if 2/3 of the body makes a decision that they would have to meet sooner than the 10 days, I believe the criteria is the 10-day period would pose substantial hardship on the body and immediate action is required to protect the public, then they can meet in less than 10 days, but 48 hours notice is still required. And it's only appropriate for discussion of certain topics, such as pending litigation, proposed legislation, disciplinary action against an officer or employee, or license examinations and applications. There's also an exception for emergencies in the case of a crippling disaster or where work stoppage would severely impair public health or safety. It has special notice requirements of only an hour. I think in the past, likely not COAF, but the Board of Trustees invoked this for handling its response to COVID. Bagley-Keene also requires public comment. So a state bar shall provide an opportunity for members of the public to directly address the body on each open session agenda item before or during consideration of the item. This is not required if public comment was allowed during a committee consideration of substantially the same item. And a body is free to adopt reasonable regulations to govern public comment, including limiting the time for particular issues and individual speakers. So, for example, our decision to have public comment at the beginning of a meeting to set a time limit, such as 2 minutes or shorter in the event of a large number of speakers, is the state bar's adoption of reasonable regulations for public comment. This sort of coming back to the topic of serial meetings, it's also possible to accidentally create or have engaged in a meeting through the use of social media. So social media and comments, including likes, may involve communications among a majority of the body outside of the meeting. So we ask that you be careful about liking and commenting on issues involving the state bar, as if ends up a majority of the body comments or likes, it could be viewed as a serial meeting. So Bagley-Keene also provides that certain meetings can be held in closed session and not open to the public. There are specific grounds in the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act where closed session is permissible. They must be held during a regular session. It cannot be scheduled independently of a noticed meeting. And we have to be expressed in the agenda about the ground for why any item is being held in closed session. The Bagley-Keene provides a list of reasons where it's appropriate. I won't go through all of these. Much of these are unlikely to come up in the context of COAF's work. But I think one of the big ones to just be aware of are that are relevant for the state bar generally are in the event of pending litigation or where discussion is required that implicates the privacy of individual licensees. The state bar also has additional grounds specific to it for entering closed session, such as discussion by the CBE of considerations of moral character, and often for discussion of specifics of the bar exam. So, you might also wonder what happens in the event that we have violated one of the mandates of the Bagley-Keene Act. Generally, to assert a Bagley-Keene violation, a person would need to bring a writ in Superior Court. And generally, the remedy is seeking to overturn the decision of the body where the Bagley-Keene violation occurred. That's sort of like the most common or likely remedy. It's also possible, however, to that the state bar would face attorney's fees for the violation. And in very sort of extreme cases where it's found that a member of a body was intentionally trying to withhold information from the public, it can be even a criminal violation. And it's considered a misdemeanor in such cases. So that's my presentation on the Bagley-Keene Act. Are there questions on this topic?
Any questions?
Nope.
I don't
Should I
see any.
should I flag now that I'm going to go off camera for a few seconds to go on my phone? And will I come back on?
All right. Well, thank you.
The role, your training is working. We're doing what you're telling us to do. And so the folks that are returning members to COAF will have heard this before. It should sound familiar. And folks that are new to COAF, you'll hear it again in the future, but it's important to keep in mind both the Bagley-Keene and the 209 trainings. So thank you so much for that information, Raul. We'll see you again next year. We'll see you before, I'm sure. All right, we're going to move forward. If at some point, so I think we have a shorter meeting today. I don't know that we'll take a break. If at some point any members need a break, please just raise your hand and we can take a short comfort break for folks. At this point, we're going to move to the discussion, an update and discussion on our Leadership SEAL program and the Diversity Summit. Those two are going to be combined. And do we have...
I am here for that.
Is Danielle here? Thank you. There we are, Danielle. I can see you now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Of course. Great. I'll share my screen. And also just want to flag for Elizabeth for role. Tristan is here as well. Or for attendance.
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, of course.
Welcome, Tristan.
Alrighty, so I will share screen and we will get going. So yes, as Judge Rhodes said, I will be presenting on 4.4, the DEI Leadership SEAL program, and then also 4.5, our diversity summits. I will start by saying we have plenty of time for this item and relatively few slides, so hopefully we have a lot of good discussion here because I don't have a lot of content on screen for you. So great. As a quick reminder, I think most of you have heard this many times, but even still, I will start with a quick overview of what the DEI Leadership SEAL program is. It is a program we launched in 2023 that is available to all legal employers that employ California attorneys, regardless of sector. So law firms, law schools, nonprofits, government agencies, etc. The program has a list of 10 action items, best practices in the DEI space, and an employer can participate in the program by committing to implement and implementing at least 5 of those 10 action items. Once they have demonstrated that they have 5 or more of those action items implemented, they then receive a DEI Leadership Seal that they can use on their web and print materials, are listed on the State Bar website, and so forth. We currently have about 100 employers participating in the program as either committed employers or SEAL recipients. So recent updates, as you all are likely aware, in January 21st, there was an executive order signed that was issued, excuse me, calling for limits on DEI programming, and the State Bar has made public comment that we do not believe that this executive order will impact our DEI programs because those programs do not involve illegal discrimination or preferences, which were specifically called out in that executive order. However, we do want to be responsive to stakeholder concerns, and particularly the employers in the DEI Leadership SEAL program. So we are temporarily pausing the DEI Leadership SEAL program so that we can review the program, the materials. We'll be working with a consultant on that review of the program as well, which may lead to some changes in the program, naming of the program, and so forth. But we plan to reopen applications later this year in July for both new employers that want to join the program and also our existing employers that want to move from committed status to SEAL recipient status or advance SEAL tiers. All those applications we anticipate will open in July and be due back in September. And just I'll mention in that review with the consultant, we do anticipate there will be stakeholder interviews to get feedback from folks, and some of those folks will be current and former COAF members. There are limited spots for those stakeholder interviews, so we've identified who we think might be a good fit for those. But so just to flag that some of you will likely be hearing from us or that consultant in the coming weeks or months on that review. And also just to say, given the current environment, we particularly want to create opportunities for participating employers to meet with one another, discuss current issues, share best practices, share concerns. This was a goal of ours for 2025, even before some of the changes that have happened in the current landscape, just because we heard in focus groups at the end of last year, for example, that was something employers really wanted to get together. So still continuing to think about how we can offer those opportunities, which I think will lead nicely into our discussion of the diversity summits for 2025. But I will stop here to see if there are any questions, comments, reactions to the quick slide or two on the leadership seal.
Thank you, Danielle. Any questions at this point? Tristan.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, I would think that executive order wouldn't apply to us as a state body. I just wanted to make sure that I was of the right thinking that this is more to be sensitive, I think is what you said. I just wanted to check.
Yes, yeah, and I think Elizabeth unmuted as well. Yes, that is our view, that this does not apply to us, both as a state agency, but also because we do not believe our programs involve the illegal discrimination and preferences that are called out. But it's to be sensitive to employers' concerns. We want to just take another close look at our program.
Okay, thank you, Danielle.
Of course.
I see Eric Silver's hand is raised, but I don't believe that is Eric Silver.
Yeah, no, Eric Silver would be looking a lot different today. I'm joining, and I'm sorry that Eric is not here. I was actually in the middle of a court hearing virtual. He reached out. For those of you who don't know, Eric was appointed to be the representative for CLA. He works for the Justice Department, and he was told just minutes before he was going to appear by his new boss, and we all know what the new administration is, that he had to resign from this committee immediately. That they would not allow him to appear. So he texted me in a panic. I was in the middle of arguing a motion via Zoom. And so I will try to find the replacement for Eric. I wish that I could sit in for the rest of this, but I've got several other back-to-back meetings that I have to go to. If I'm able to come back later, I will. But I just wanted folks to know he really wanted to be on this committee. He was excited about it. His prior boss told him he could. But with the change in administration and when they found out he was going to be here today, he was ordered to resign immediately. So I'm heartbroken. He's heartbroken. But I just wanted folks to know what happened to Eric.
Thank you so much. And that's
Thank you.
Terrence Evans with California Lawyers Association. So thank you. Thank you for the update. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I don't know that I saw any other hands. Any other questions for Danielle or other comments? Maybe the questions will come after your next section here, Danielle.
Sure, of course. And I believe 4.5 will be a little bit more discussion. We're hoping it will be more discussion and kind of brainstorming with you all. But yeah, to transition to diversity summits. So as you all may recall, we plan to hold at least 2 diversity summits in 2025, one in person and one virtually, and originally, planned to craft these agendas based around feedback on prior diversity summits and also the great brainstorming that we've had at these meetings and with the COAF working group. Some of those ideas that have come up before are things like another discussion on mentorship and sponsorship, looking at different types of diversity that we haven't highlighted at diversity summits recently, things like attorneys with disabilities, LGBTQIA plus attorneys, and the relevant issues there. I'll say we'll still plan to cover those topics. They're still very much on the list, but also want to be responsive to the current environment, right? And give space for a lot of discussion around DEI programming in the current landscape and how employers are responding and either pivoting or not with their DEI programming at their workplaces. So we are planning to hold a in-person diversity summit on June 26th, and really want to spend some time getting your all's thoughts on topics or presentations we might want to include for that event. I'll say at the outset, we're interested in kind of topics at this point that might be worth doing a little research on and digging into more, and then we can work with the working group to identify who some of those specific speakers might be or panelists might be. Elizabeth, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to add something or just getting ready?
Getting ready, but also like I can add that I think one of our initial thoughts is starting off the summit with some key stakeholders talking about perhaps how they're responding in this time, or whether they've changed kind of their programs or initiatives or had them stay the same. Just thinking about, what they're doing that others might be able to do as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so some of the ideas that we were kind of noodling on to start with is exactly that, a panel or presentation from some employers on how they're pivoting or not, given kind of the current environment. And then also we anticipate there will be some portion of the day that'll be spent on probably relatively quick kind of update snapshot on any changes to the DEI leadership seal that will come out of that review, since it should be wrapped up or very close to wrapped up by that point. But yeah, I really would love to open the floor to hear if you all have thoughts about what we should be talking about, should not be talking about at this summit, and what might be helpful for folks to hear or see data on, and so forth.
Tristan.
I have
I'm
a
sorry.
question. Sorry,
Go ahead,
should
Yemi.
I wait, Judge Rhodes?
Go ahead, Yemi, and then I'll call on you, Tristan.
Sorry about that. So I was just curious, do we have a sense of what organizations' spend is with minority-led firms, or I guess certified, maybe the way to identify or track those spends? Do we have a sense of that?
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I don't think we do. Yeah, we don't.
I'm just wondering if that's a way to think about whether or not there is sort of balance in the way that we're ensuring that the market for services is just viewed in a way that is balanced and robust across demographic profiles. I was just kind of curious if folks are thinking about that as a way to get around some of the skepticism that folks have around identity markers and focus on those. I land.
Okay, thank you, Tristan, and then Angelica.
Thank you, Judge. I think it might be interesting to do a pre-summit survey of firms to ask them if they have made any changes. I've heard that some law firms have received lawsuits from the federal government if they were involved in any kind of prosecution of the president. So I know there's some fear, and I'd love some information about how many firms are making a change or how many corporations are making a change beforehand. I mean, we don't want to give a forum for people to talk about why they're not caring about diversity anymore, but I think that might be interesting. And I also think it might be interesting to hear from any firm that has taken a stand, along the lines of Staples or, some of the companies or firms that have said, no, we're not going to do that. And they're taking it strong. I think that would be a really interesting speaker because they would certainly have had done some sort of legal analysis, I would think, and thought it through. Those would be my two thoughts.
Great. Yeah, I will say one activity that we've undertaken the last couple weeks is tried to do a search or sweep of our leadership seal employers and see if there are some that have taken that more public stand as sort of a starting place. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. Angelica?
Maybe this is outside of the scope of for the diversity summit, but I just wanted to flag an interesting report that UCLA published probably like a week or two ago, and it's more about the diversity of the bench in California. I assume that there's other reports similar to that about certainly that the State Bar also has, but I just wanted to put that out there because I do think that there's outside research from different university entities on what we're seeing. I just thought it was a fascinating report to see what our California judiciary looks like in terms of gender diversity, things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for flagging that. I'll take a look for sure.
Jezreel?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Tristan's comment. My initial thought was I think it's great to have the seal recipients interact with each other and share ideas. My thought was, how can we do it in a way that we can receive the information and kind of have it somewhere central or for us to rely on in the work that we're doing. So I love the idea of the survey.
Yeah, thank you for echoing that. I didn't mention it in my response to Tristan, but I also am excited about the idea of a survey. I think that's a great idea.
Come on.
Yes, something I'm interested in for the summit is, even before the recent executive orders, I think organizations were struggling with kind of DEI governance or decision-making. If you're wanting to form a committee, what are some considerations you need to take into account? If you're planning to have an affinity group or ERG, how do you structure that? How do you decide on your standard operating procedures, stuff like that? And I think some of that is more relevant to larger entities, but if there's been any thought into maybe having like breakout rooms at the summit, I think that would be an interesting topic.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we definitely want to incorporate breakout sessions where we can. So that's an exciting and possible topic for one.
I don't see any other hands. Any other comments, thoughts, suggestions for Danielle? Okay, thank you, Danielle. Yemi. You are muted, Yemi. Yemi, you are muted. We can't hear you.
I just wanted to contextualize my comments a little bit, particularly because I was at a large organization and I actually founded an ERG. One of the things, that we thought about and focused on was sort of the things that make folks feel sort of included and welcome and seen by the whole organization is how that organization is spending money and how it sees its consumer base. And so that, to the sort of question about what, the clients are looking for and how they're, tracking their spends across, diverse groups and diversely owned entities, is potentially a way to sort of counteract the narrative that there's some imbalance, right? Like I just think that there's other be subject to conjecture, but really anchor things into actually, sort of how dollars are flowing. So I don't know if that helps to contextualize a little bit of what I'm thinking, but I was sitting on the side of sort of being an organization that was looking at how to spend our money with organizations that, when they brought us their best team, the best team that they brought was diverse. And that was sort of my perspective as someone that was engaging firms and engaging lawyers across in the profession. I land.
Thank you. That's helpful. That's helpful context for sure. Well, great. Thank you. I will just say that I think our working group for diversity summits is, or at least has been in the past, Shalak and Tara. So you will be hearing from me soon while we continue to kind of put something together for June. So thank you all.
Thank you again, Danielle. And thanks for the update. We look forward to hearing more. We'll move on to item 4.6 on our agenda. It's the update and discussion related to AI and bias in recruitment and advancement. And we have Sylvia with us here for that update.
Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. So my name is Sylvia Nam. I'm a senior program analyst in the Office of Access and Inclusion. And today I'll be sharing some preliminary research on AI and bias in recruitment and career advancement. And the presentation is designed to prime our discussion. So I look forward to hearing your insights and reactions to explore these important issues together. And just wanted to note that I think that there's important through lines and resonance with the presentation that Raul shared with us earlier in today's meeting. So the broader goal of the project is to better understand how AI is impacting the legal profession, particularly through the lens of bias, equity, and fairness. And so as part of this effort, I reviewed existing research on bias in employment. So I'll highlight how legal experts, civil rights advocates, and academics understand the role of AI, primarily in reinforcing existing structural and systemic inequalities. And based on today's conversation, the next step is to identify additional research areas, as well as any patterns, trends, or topics that stand out to you as this committee. So before diving in, I wanted to clarify some key terms, and I'm sure, I don't know if you hear the word AI and your mind goes blank, or it's just exhaustion because we are immersed in its waters. The broader category that I'll actually be talking about is, and this is a mouthful, automated decision-making systems in hiring, of which AI is part. So while AI is often used as a shorthand and a useful one, it actually falls under the larger category of ADM. Machine learning is a subset of AI, and it's something that enables computers to learn from data and improve performance without being explicitly programmed for that task. So unlike traditional software that follows fixed instructions, machine models analyze patterns in data to make predictions and refine these predictions over time. And I'll provide greater nuance in that word prediction in a little bit. So how common is automated decision-making in hiring? So according to the Fast Company and Harvard Business School, 7 out of 10 employers use ADM tools in the hiring process. 99% of Fortune 500 companies rely on applicant tracking systems, and these are the systems that we use in order to apply for a job. And these applicant tracking systems often have algorithmic built-ins that filter, rank, screen job candidates. These tools automate things from resume screening based on knockout questions. So for example, the number of years of experience, keyword matching for required qualifications, and again, predictive ranking based on past hiring data. And so while these tools increase efficiency, they raise concerns about fairness and transparency, which I'll explore in the next few slides. So I wanted to organize, I've organized the research and policy strategies into 4 key areas that you see here. So on the upper left, hiring discrimination refers to how AI-driven tools can reinforce biases in recruitment and in candidate evaluation. Algorithmic bias refers to the ways that AI models inherit and amplify historical discrimination present in the data that it's trained on. The third on the bottom left, AI models as black boxes, refers to a lack of transparency in AI decision-making, making it oftentimes difficult to audit or challenge unfair hiring outcomes. And then finally, regulatory and legal concerns. That will be a way for me to present some of the evolving legal and policy work shaping AI's role in hiring and workplace decision-making. And so these categories provide a broad framework for understanding key risks, challenges, and opportunities associated with AI and employment. And I'll explore each of these areas in greater depth. So one of the best known studies on hiring discrimination is a 2004 paper published in the American Economic Review by the economists Mary Ann Bertrand and Sendil Mullainathan, titled "Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal? A Field Experiment on Labor Market Discrimination." And so what they did is that they sent fictitious resumes in response to help wanted ads in Boston and Chicago's newspapers. To manipulate perceived race, resumes were randomly assigned either white-sounding names, i.e. Emily and Greg, or African-American sounding names such as Lakeisha and Jamal. White names received 50% more callbacks for interviews than Black names, and resume quality mattered more for white applicants. Highly qualified white candidates received significantly more callbacks than equally qualified Black candidates. And this racial gap, according to these economists, was consistent across occupations, across industries, as well as across employer size. A preferred methodological approach to study bias in these contexts is to use racially distinctive names. And so researchers will use voter registration and census data, so publicly available data, to derive demographically distinct names, meaning that names are associated with Americans of a particular race or ethnicity at least 90% of the time. And so using real people's names, by contrast, can introduce ambiguity since names don't always indicate or match race or ethnicity. Building on this very well-known paper, economists from UC Berkeley and University of Chicago conducted a nationwide study published a few years ago in 2022. They sent over 80,000 fictitious job applications to over 100 Fortune 500 companies. So their findings were the worst 20% of companies were responsible for approximately half of total discrimination against Black applicants. Discrimination varied widely across firms, with some companies favoring women and others favoring men. In March 2024, Bloomberg ran an AI hiring experiment using an earlier version of ChatGPT 3.5, applying the methodology that I mentioned about fictitious names for different job postings. It also found that, quote, using generative AI for recruiting and hiring poses a serious risk for automated discrimination at scale, unquote. And the experiment confirms what prior hiring discrimination research has shown over the last 20 years, but with a new risk. AI models trained on biased data don't just perpetuate employment discrimination, they can amplify that discrimination. Despite the growing use of AI in hiring, there's actually very little controlled testing comparing human-driven versus AI-driven hiring decisions, particularly when evaluating and assessing discrimination. Nonetheless, research on algorithmic bias suggests that AI-driven tools can lead to more discrimination rather than reducing it. So why? So AI models don't predict the future. In fact, they reinforce the past. So AI tools operate on pattern recognition, meaning that they don't predict new information, but replicate what already exists in the workplace or in society. This includes historical biases already embedded in hiring patterns, as well as subjective performance evaluations. So bias data can lead to bias predictions. Also, when training data is incomplete, unrepresentative, or error-ridden, AI models also learn and reproduce biased outcomes. These biases can be hidden through proxy variables, where AI uses seemingly neutral factors that act as stand-ins for protected categories. An example of a proxy variable in hiring is the use of zip codes. where you live can serve as an important stand-in for your race and class. Screening for college degrees in male-dominated fields can also unintentionally filter out women or non-binary candidates. There's also disproportionate or overrepresentation in negative data sets for certain ethnic and racial groups. So for example, African Americans and Latinos are overrepresented in data sets tied to evictions, credit history, criminal records, and of course, this is tied to the history of over-policing, redlining, and underbanking. But this data is frequently used in background checks, which is the last part of an employment and a hiring process. So when AI tools rely on historical data that's discriminatory, they magnify existing inequalities rather than reducing them. AI models also struggle with groups that are underrepresented in training data. For example, if an AI hiring tool lacks sufficient examples of trans candidates or people with disabilities, it may misclassify them, ignore their applications, or evaluate them inaccurately. Another well-known example is facial recognition software that's been found to have higher error rates for darker skin tones and non-binary individuals. AI resume tools, screening tools may also fail to recognize non-traditional career paths, disproportionately affecting individuals from diverse educational and socioeconomic backgrounds. So the third category of research I've titled AI systems as black boxes. So as I mentioned before, unlike traditional rule-based systems, AI models aren't explicitly programmed to follow fixed decision rules. Instead, they learn from vast amounts of data and generate decisions based on probability and pattern recognition. And so the plus side is that this makes AI highly adaptable, but also on the downside, it makes it also incredibly opaque. Oftentimes, developers themselves don't have direct control over how AI generalizes from the training data that it's fed. Even when models are fine-tuned and data is analyzed, AI systems can develop unpredictable or unintended patterns that primarily reflect biases present in that data. Then there's also the illusion of AI objectivity. So a common assumption is that AI is less biased than human decision makers because, again, it processes large data sets rather than rely on human intuition, subjective feelings, biases, but also human discernment. So this belief is called automation bias, or the tendency to trust decisions made by AI or automated systems, even when they're flawed or unverified. And a problem identified by policy advocates and researchers is that this bias AI bias is rarely tested rigorously. Many models are deployed without thorough evaluation for fairness or discriminatory impact. Worse is that automation bias can also be used as a justification. So a person can respond, "We did what the computer told us to do," as both a cover and an alibi, which shields decision makers from accountability, making bias harder to detect as well as to correct. So then the consequences then are a lack of accountability as well as a lack of transparency. When AI decisions go unquestioned due to automation bias, it becomes harder to identify discrimination embedded in AI decision-making. It becomes harder to challenge unfair hiring outcomes or biased algorithmic screening. And it also makes it hard to hold organizations accountable for biased AI-driven decisions. So far I've covered key insights from research and some insights from media at the intersection of law, labor, and race. Now I wanted to shift focus to legislation, starting with core federal laws that govern hiring and employment discrimination. Federal protections like the ADA or the Americans with Disability Act ensure that workers with disabilities are not unfairly excluded from employment opportunities. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act prohibits age-based hiring discrimination, particularly protecting workers 40 and older. And of course, there's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which makes it illegal for employers to discriminate on the basis of race, gender, and other protected categories. But history shows that legal protections alone don't always prevent discriminatory hiring practices. For example, after Title VII outlined explicit race and gender discrimination, employers started relying on educational and testing requirements to create new hidden barriers, particularly for Black workers. And these practices were challenged in the landmark Griggs versus Duke Power case in 1971, which introduced the legal concept of disparate impact, or when seemingly neutral employment policies disproportionately exclude certain groups. This case established that an employer can justify a hiring practice only if it, according to the code of the section of the United States Code, only if it's job related and consistent with business necessity. However, enforcement has long remained a challenge, especially when it comes to hiring. Title VII and other similar laws operate on retrospective liability, meaning that individuals must first experience discrimination and then prove it. This is difficult and obviously resource intensive. Even when the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the federal agency responsible for labor complaints, recognized a few years ago AI's potential to enable systemic employment discrimination, the reality is that the current legal system requires individual victims to identify and prove bias. Again, an enormous hurdle given that AI systems often function as black boxes and their decision-making processes are opaque. At the state level, California's Fair Employment and Housing Act, FEHA, provides stronger protections than federal law. FEHA covers a broad range of protected categories beyond what's provided in Title VII. And I mention this because FEHA complaints are handled by the California Civil Rights Department, and I'll mention some of the work that that department has been doing to regulate AI in hiring. Given all the changes alluded to by Danielle with the changes at the federal level, one of the possibilities is that the role of state regulation will likely become even more important. And I say this because in October 2021, EEOC launched the AI and Algorithmic Fairness Initiative, which was aimed to ensure that AI and other tech-driven hiring complied with federal civil rights laws. By May 2022, the EEOC had issued guidance on AI hiring practices and the ADA. Then in January 2023, the agency hosted a public hearing titled Navigating Employment Discrimination in AI and Automated Systems, a New Civil Rights Frontier. A few months after that, EEOC settled its first AI hiring discrimination lawsuit for $365,000, alleging that an AI hiring software rejected candidates between the ages of 55 and 60. But this initiative was short-lived. In January of this year, the current administration dismissed both the EEOC chair and the vice chair, the first time in history that commissioners were fired, and the initiative on AI and algorithmic fairness was disbanded. Biden-era guidance on responsible AI has been removed from federal agency websites, including the EEOC, as well as the Department of Labor. Despite the removal of guidance, employers are still legally responsible for complying with anti-discrimination laws in hiring, which means that the absence of guidance does not mean the absence of legal liability and responsibility. And this is where efforts in California remain instructive. In June 2024, the California Civil Rights Council proposed new rules under FEHA that would amend the California Code of Regulations, and that would regulate automated decision-making systems, including AI-driven tools in hiring. These regulations explicitly state that if an AI hiring tool prioritizes or excludes candidates based on protected characteristics, that constitutes discrimination. These rules also make it clear, and this is, I think, something that has made it very, very interesting potentially for discussion, is that third-party hiring services are considered agents of employers, meaning that companies remain legally responsible for discrimination, even if they outsource AI-driven hiring to external vendors. California lawmakers also proposed more ambitious regulations, though not all of them have been successful. There was AB 2930 that would have required AI developers and employers to establish very rigorous governance as well as auditing programs. And it was considered groundbreaking, and one that didn't pass, but potentially can serve as a model for future policymaking. Looking ahead at the federal level, the current administration has framed AI policy under a framework that it refers to as global AI dominance, shifting focus away from fairness and from oversight. And so there's this core tension and balance between the plus sides of AI, which is greater efficiency in hiring, with the need for fairness, accountability, equity, and transparency. So earlier I mentioned incredible widespread adoption of automated decision-making systems in hiring. For example, I noted that virtually all Fortune 500 companies use some form of automated decision-making. A 2022 survey by the trade group, the Society for Human Resource Management, also found that over half, close to 65%, of HR professionals reported using AI or other forms of automation to filter out unqualified candidates. And this practice reflects a longstanding push for automation in higher human resources, given the need for cost savings, as well as efficiency in hiring process. So what does this look like in practice? So here's a breakdown of some of the key ways AI is currently being used to streamline recruitment and hiring. So the first is screening. So AI-powered machine learning can analyze resumes to match candidates to job descriptions based on skills, experience, or things like fit. Predictive analytics also include things like historical hiring data, performance metrics, behavioral assessments to predict which candidates are most likely to succeed in a given role. There are AI-driven tools that go beyond resume screening by assessing a candidate's soft skills, cultural fit, and communication abilities in the interviewing process, sometimes even analyzing facial expressions and speech patterns during video interviews. Employers are also using AI-driven tech assessments, simulations, and games to test and evaluate problem-solving skills, coding abilities, and cognitive reasoning. And finally, on background checks, AI has definitely accelerated background checks, including employment verification, criminal history screenings, and credit checks. So now that we've explored some of the research, some of the potential challenges and pitfalls of the high use of AI in hiring, I'd like to shift our focus to a discussion and next steps. So I'll present some big picture questions. And in terms of the next steps of engaging with legal employers in their usage of AI, I'll present some potential questions. And I'd appreciate your feedback and the generative conversation to follow. So some of the big picture questions include, what strategies are currently used to reduce bias in legal hiring? And how do legal employers promote diversity and inclusion in recruitment as well as retention? The next question is, does AI provide an opportunity to address efforts to diversify and reduce bias in legal hiring? What are the biggest risks if employers don't develop AI legal hiring best practices? And for a body like this or the state bar, what role do groups play, advisory groups and regulatory groups play in setting AI recruitment and retention standards? And finally, if COAF could design an AI recruitment and retention best practice framework, what key principles would it include? And then just to kind of give you a preview of potential questions in this next phase of research to ask of legal employers, the first cluster of questions are about AI and automation and hiring, really getting a sense of the tools used by legal employers in practice. Given the fact that there are specialized AI tools like Westlaw, VLEX for legal research and discovery, it'd be, I think, important to note if there's specified tools for legal hiring that are AI driven. And so the question then would be along the lines of, what sort of tools do legal employers use? And the role of AI in their hiring strategy, if it's central or if it's supplemental. And if they actually have data, whether or not AI is actually supporting their efficiency gains, or if they're seeing pitfalls or drawbacks. And then the final cluster of questions are to engage legal employers in bigger picture policy and ethical considerations to guide AI use in hiring. So, for example, are there internal policies that legal employers use when they're using these tools? And if so, what are their key principles? Is there a general pulse within the legal industry in terms of ethical concerns that shape the role of AI in legal hiring? Questions around transparency, fairness, and bias, and whether or not there have been concerns from candidates about the use of AI in the hiring process, particularly for up-and-coming lawyers in the beginning of the pipeline. So happy to open the floor to questions or share the slide on the big picture questions, or if you had any follow-ups.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I want to say I appreciate you narrowing the scope at the beginning to what we're talking about when we're talking about AI, because I'm sure we've all been to AI trainings that are generally talking about AI without really pinning it down. And I appreciate too, we're talking specifically here about AI and the use of automation tools in the hiring process. I'll just point out, I'm sure you're aware, but I'll flag for other members of the council that the State Bar last year, I believe, issued some guidelines on the practical use of AI in the practice of law. It's relatively short. It hits on a lot of the rules of professional conduct that are applicable to attorneys, including prohibitions on discrimination and harassment when you're using AI. And then just recently, the Judicial Council has issued a draft proposal and a draft of a rule of court for the use of AI, and this is specific to generative AI, but the use of generative AI at superior courts and appellate courts as well. So that might be something that employers are looking at as they're crafting their own AI policies in a slightly different field. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on questions that Sylvia might add to the list for legal employers? Tristan has one, and let me ask this before I forget to, can we get the links to the studies that you were referring to, Sylvia? They sound quite interesting.
Happy to share
Tristan?
them.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Well, it's great work, Sylvia, and this really thorough report. I really appreciate it. One of the things that we did at a former large tech company that I worked for and advised on this issue was we required the providers of the ADM services to make statements about the underpinnings of the trading of the algorithm. And so when we were dealing with a service provider, we would require them to state that there had been ethical use of AI in the in the building of the software. When we were contracting with the actual developers, right, of the AI, of the engine, we required them to confirm, to attest to the fact that they had ensured there was no, or that there was a minimum of unethical images being used to train the algorithm, for example, or a variety of things. And so there's a precedent for that if you wanted to include that. Well, at least there's one precedent, one giant company. If you wanted to include that in the questions, and if you're interested, we could talk about it more offline. But just a thought that it's one way to hold the corporations a little bit more responsible for the tools that they're using.
Great, appreciate that.
I
do think that raises an important point about AI as this paradigm shifting tool in this current moment versus earlier moments in time. So if we think about really critical things like the internet or GPS, it was really developed within with guardrails by the government because it was funded by the Department of Defense. And I think what makes both AI interesting and challenging from that regulatory ethical state of framework about underpinning data is that it's housed primarily, it's housed in the private sector, and the government is over there. And so I think those statements of what the training data is, I think are great. But I think that audit question becomes a challenge because it's proprietary and confidential too. And so I think balancing potentially. So, I
mean, most of the systems that I was aware of were using generally accessible data.
Okay.
And so it was hard for them to argue that it was proprietary the training methodologies for the engines. So it has to be a little earlier in the process, right? Of course. But I'm just really suggesting that the questions will help employers to be even just a fraction more aware of what they are using, right? Because a lot of employers, like you said, there's that effect of, well, I'm just using the system. But the systems are really inherently, some people argue, unethical and infringing, right? Because they don't get rights to the databases that they're using. You know, there's the artistic community, right, is up in arms. So I think anything we can do to maybe just slow down a little bit the adoption without thought. Of course, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to be a Luddite, you know, oh, we can't use AI, but the idea that if we can help people to think about it more ethically, that it's not perfect, right? In fact, it's quite flawed. That would be maybe a valuable role for our organization. But that's a great point, Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. Any other thoughts or suggestions for Sylvia? Angelica,
sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, one idea that I think would be helpful in terms of sort of the questions outlining is, you know, as an employer, I'd be curious where, in terms of the data, where there's like less concern to the use of AI systems. So, for example, maybe I'm an employer and I just want to screen out, like I'm hiring for attorneys, and this happens sometimes in our job. Like, you know, we get applicants who don't have a JD degree, and the requirement is that they have, and so that's kind of part of our initial screening. I would assume that like an AI system like that seems pretty easy, I think, but maybe I'm wrong, that you wouldn't have like any issues with using an AI system like that. I think those types of examples would be helpful in terms of identifying if there are where, and that probably goes to your best practices comment of like, these are the places where there's like less concern in using a tool for hiring purposes, and to just like sort of screen out things where you're not going to have issues or concerns.
Thank you for that.
Tristan has another comment. Go ahead, Tristan.
Well, Sylvia did say generative discussion, so I wonder if, you know, that's a great comment by Angelica, and some of the distinction might be that there's a very big difference between a database that does a mapping, for example, that like lays out the streets and uses, you know, satellite data as well as other known data, the old Thomas Guide, whatever, you know, it's using all of that data, versus a bank system using the zip codes to do redlining for their loan processes, right? There's a big difference between an algorithm that can tell who has what degree versus a decision-making tool that filters out people who don't have a degree, when we need to be, it would be great if we were reminding companies that they might want to reconsider their degree requirement because of the discrimination in higher education. So I think it's a great comment and something that we could explore a little further, that, you know, it's like the hammer is a hammer, right? A hammer is a good tool. You could use it to build a house, or you could use it to kill someone. But I think most people don't have any idea of the distinction there, and that there are multiple levels of assistance. You know, AI generation is one thing, but the decision-making part of it is the really dangerous part in my well, sort of researched opinion, not as current as yours. So yeah, for what it's worth.
Tristan, you know I always welcome and appreciate all comments, including second and follow-up comments, so thank you for that. Sylvia, I'm going to put you on alert for something I'm going to ask for the next time we have this conversation, and Elizabeth knows that I always ask for more information on some of these things, but I think it's really interesting, and especially coming out of that conversation, to think about how different sized employers or employers in different practice areas use or don't use these types of tools. So I'm coming from government practice exclusively, for instance, whether they use or don't use it, and whether smaller firms, for instance, are nervous about using these types of tools, or if they're cost prohibitive for them. But to one of Tristan's questions, perhaps a question of, if you're not using it, Why aren't you using it? Is it because you don't understand or appreciate the distinctions between different levels of this types of tools?
Right. There is an interesting parallel in the hiring discrimination literature. For example, it varies by sector. Discrimination happens varying by race and by gender, but it seems like discrimination is less pronounced amongst federal contractors, primarily because of the scrutiny and the requirements, just like a kind of mindful attention around bias. So this is less about the size, but more about what sort of ethical considerations are in place, how these tools are used. And so to echo what you were saying, Judge Rose, but also Tristan, your point, it's not the generation per se that's the issue. It's implementation, its execution, and its application. And that I think that nuance is important. So thank you both.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, I don't see any more. Thank you so much, Sylvia. This was really interesting. And we got a reference to a Thomas guide, which certainly will be a generational divider, I think. So thanks, Tristan, for making my day with that. Thank you, Sylvia. Let's move into 4.7 and 8. And just so folks are aware, I think we have perhaps 20 more minutes. So I'm going to press forward at this point to the end of our meeting. Elizabeth is going to handle our next updates with regard to the early pipeline to the profession materials and our implicit bias online MCLE module.
Thank you. So just related to our early pipeline work, outreach materials work, there is for the 2025 work plan, another item related to outreach in general. And so I feel like those two topics will be hand in hand. So my proposal is to merge them and we can figure out a working group to look at those issues when we're ready for that. And I see nodding, so great. So we will do that. And then just a very quick update for our implicit bias online training module. This is a module that is available to all California attorneys on the State Bar's e-learning platform related to implicit bias. We are finalizing our work on it now and plan to release it after the current MCLE reporting deadline in a few weeks. The reason we are holding it back is because we can see that there are hundreds of attorneys in the middle of the old module, and so we don't want to disrupt their progress as they're trying to fulfill the requirements. So we're going to wait till we close out reporting and then release it probably in early April. So again, thank you to Angelica and our former COAF member Novella for your work on that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Any questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any. We'll move into 4.9, which is the discussion of additional diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. This is really just kind of an open mic portion. I don't have any particular discussion points on this, but it's an opportunity for members to raise any additional initiatives that we should be considering or evaluating. And as a caveat here, Elizabeth is going to be doing a quick update on our work plan as well here shortly. So that might be part of your question or comment too. Elizabeth, how about I turn it over to you for the work plan update, and maybe that will generate some additional comment.
So in December, we spent a lot of time, in our last meeting in December, we spent a lot of time going through the work plan and adding several items like the outreach item that I mentioned earlier, which really came out of our December Diversity Summit, kind of engaging with more stakeholders related to this work. And so I've integrated all of your feedback, and hopefully you all have taken had a chance to review it. If there's anything that I missed, please let me know and then I can update it. As I mentioned, the board has not yet approved the work plan as they're still going over through the sub-entity review process. I anticipate that they will approve a work plan after that process is complete in May.
Thank you. Any other, I know that there are we have a lot of things out there and a lot of things that are a bit in flux, but if there are any other thoughts happy to consider them or address them as we go through the work plan and once the work plan gets approved. Okay, great, thank you. So we are moving on to our liaison reports, and we heard from Terrence earlier about CLA, and we'll have a new CLA liaison hopefully for our next meeting to get an update from them. We don't have our Cal Law rep here, I don't believe.
No,
I don't see her. Okay, but we do have Christina Resendez-Johnson, who I'm happy to have here as an attorney from the Judicial Council to stand in for Judge Monica Diaz, who unfortunately couldn't be here, to provide an update for the Judicial Council on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Good to see you, Christina. Christina and I work together on the Providing Access and Fairness Working Group at the Judicial Council.
Thank you, Judge Rhodes. Thank you, Elizabeth, and everyone who's here, and all of you COAF members. It's a pleasure to see you all. As Judge Rhodes explained, Judge Diaz couldn't be here because she had some scheduling conflicts with her trial that's in her department currently, but she wanted me to express her most sincere apologies for not being available. But for the liaison update in regards to PAF, which is what we call the Advisory Committee on Providing Access and Fairness, we have two particular projects that are on our 2025 annual agenda that we have gotten some very steady progress, and so I'm here to give some updates on those. So first, we have our Language Access Signage and Technology Grant Cycle 7 project, which launched for fiscal year 2025 to 2026 on February 5th of 2025. So a webinar training for the language access representatives throughout the state of California was held on February 13th with a demonstration of the SharePoint application site. This was an effort to get more courts, of course, to get familiar with the application, and also to get the word out there even more about the grant money that's available. The training included a presentation from San Francisco Superior Court, Judge Rhodes Superior Court, on one of the court's prior grant cycle projects. The deadline for courts to submit applications for funding was back on February 28th, 2025. The draft report with proposed recommendations and allocations for Cycle 7 will go to PAF, my committee, in late March, the Information Technology Advisory Committee in April, and then the Technology Committee in May. So, and then we will eventually send it over to the Judicial Council in general at its meeting on July 18th. And then next, regarding a very exciting and cutting edge project, which has to do with AI as well and using technology, is we have training on the voice and text application and machine translation tools that are available to courts around the state. Staff at the Judicial Council have been working with Judicial Council Information and Technology staff and the National Center for State Courts, NCSC, to develop training webinars and job aids for court clerks, self-help center staff, and language access representatives on the appropriate use of machine translation tools within the courthouse. As part of the project, NCSC gathered information from courts who are piloting the California Courts Translator application that uses voice-to-text technology. NCSC conducted a survey. They did court site visits, and they also did focus group sessions with pilot courts to help determine appropriate training needs for the courts. NCSC is currently drafting a training curriculum for language access and IT staff at the council to review and plan to conduct the training webinars in the spring of this year, so 2025. Our language access subcommittee plans to meet on March 27th, and we're going to discuss the two language access projects. Those are the updates that I have for you all. Our next PAF meeting, which of course is open to the public as well, is going to be held on April 17th from 12:15 to 1:15 p.m. via Zoom. All of the link and materials will be posted online at least 5 calendar days before the meeting. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for standing in today, Christina. It's great to see you. Great to hear the update. Any questions or comments for Christina? No? Okay, I don't see any. That brings us to the end of our agenda, believe it or not. So I want to thank you all for your time and for your attention. I know we have some upcoming projects and our working groups will continue to meet as we go forward. I should have the next meeting date in front of me, but I don't. Elizabeth, do you have it?
It is June 27th
Thank
in
you.
Los Angeles in person.
That one is going to be in person. That was going to be my follow-up to make sure that people have it on their calendar so that hopefully you're able to make it and we can see one another in person. It will be also broadcast on Zoom if you can't make it, but hopefully you will be able to be there in person. Thank you again. I always enjoy the work and I always enjoy hearing from you. And I want to thank specifically all of the staff members at the State Bar who are really the key drivers of this work. So thank you all so much, Elizabeth, especially for helping us move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.